Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Good to have you along. Hope you had a fantastic Christmas, great New Year, all that crap. Um, it's been a weird one here in the UK. We've kind of gone just from one lockdown to another to another. It's just rolling and kind of getting more restrictions are getting more severe as we go along. Um, anyway, so I thought for anyone who's like into guitars and wants to geek out on gear, I thought I'd do a video and just go through each of the guitars really in my collection. So I'm not going to talk about the amp today, but in case you're wondering, I use Marshall Mode 4. I was kind of always into. Don't get me wrong, I like dual Rex and all that sort of stuff, but kind of everyone uses them, and I kind of wanted to get away from that sound. And yeah, what can I say? I like Marshalls. I don't like all Marshalls, but I like the old 800s and stuff like that. Um, But tube amps, you kind of have to drive them quite hard to get them to sound good. So they're not really practical for kind of situations at home recording studios and stuff like that all the time. And also, yeah, I mean, like I was quite into like Dimebag Darrell, from Pantera back in the day, and he used solid state Randalls. And what can I say? Yeah, I mean, like back when I lived in South Africa, my mate Christo, bandmate from a band I was in called The Construct back then, he had a Mode 4, and I really liked the sound of it. And when I came over to the UK, I just picked one up, and I haven't really looked back. So yeah, people can say whatever they want about solid state, but kiss my ass. Right, so let's move on to the guitars. So the first one up is the Randy Rhoads RR3 Flying V. You can always recognize it's a Rhoads because it has a shorter horn on one side and a longer one on the top. And yeah, so this is a Jackson one. Jackson obviously being the company that originally made his custom Vs for him. And then obviously you got other companies like ESP and so on who have kind of jumped on and kind of done their own takes on that and custom models for various artists over a long period of time. So the story of this one is I used to work at Anderton's Music in Guildford, Surrey. It's about a 40-minute train ride outside of London. But before I started working for them, when I first came to the UK in 2005, we were hunting, my father and I were hunting for an acoustic guitar for him. We were going to record some tunes for him. And we needed an acoustic with a good plug-in sound and a bass to do that. And so we were touring around a few music stores in Surrey. And we popped into Anderton's to have a bit of a browse and spotted this on one of the guitar stands. And it had a very good discount on it. I think these are usually a sort of a 500 quid, 600 quid guitar, something like that. But this one had been bashed and gotten this chip, this ding, off of the horn, which isn't too bad. It's really just right on the edge here. It's not like it's been completely sheared off or anything like that. It's just taken a bit, really. And they had it down to 280, 280 pounds. Anyway, so I gave it a strum, as I usually do. I don't plug these things in when I test them first. I just give them a kind of strum and just see if they resonate. And this really resonated. Like the whole body was like, ooh. So I was like, there's a bit of tone in that. And so I was like, okay, let's go plug it in. Obviously, yeah, I mean, it's got to look and feel good. And this one does. It's super, super comfortable to play. Anyway, they're not super comfortable out of the box, I'll be honest. Like, it's an Indonesian-made one. And they ship from a very warm, humid climate. So it's kind of wrong to expect them to play right out of the box. And they do come in a box, just cardboard box with kind of styrofoam inserts and things like that. It's not the same as when you ship a guitar in a solid case. You can control how quickly it kind of cools down and heats up a bit more. And again, the humidity can kind of keep that from just changing really rapidly. So when you get these things, you need to set them up out of the box, or they're not going to play right. But once you do that, then there's nothing wrong with these. They're pretty great. They do the job, and it has really killer tone too. So let's just run through it. Let's start with clean sound. Anyway, so you get the idea. It's got a really nice kind of round, juicy kind of tone to it. The pickups are kind of medium hot, I would say. I like a passive pickup. I'm not into active pickups myself. I've played active pickups. I'm not knocking them, but they're a little like too compressed for my taste. I like a kind of broader, warmer sound, and then I like the option to kind of rein it in from there. Whereas I find with EMGs, they're already restricted and kind of tightened up. So you can't draw blood out of stone. That's my view on that. That being said, since this guitar was out, there's a lot of like really innovative active pickups that have come out, or semi-active pickups that have come out since then, that are very good in that area, but just used to what I'm used to. So these are just the Duncan designs that came with the guitar. I thought I was going to have to change them. I was planning on putting, you know, like a JB in the bridge, and or JB in the neck, and what's the other one? And oh, I can't remember. The same ones that you would usually get in the Japanese models, put it that way. But anyway, I didn't bother with that because it sounds fine. So yeah, and famously, like Master of Puppets, as a good example, was recorded on kind of El Cheapo guitars, and yeah, they sound kick-ass. Whereas a lot of stuff that's been done since then that is on more expensive guitars, it doesn't necessarily sound better. So if it ain't broke, do you really need to fix it? Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, here's what it sounds like dirty. It's, yeah, nice and super crunchy, really easy to play. As you can hear, it's got like the meat and potatoes where it counts. Really nice and kind of broad and Right, so this is the next one up in the collection. This is the Jackson SL7. Always wanted a Jackson Soloist. But I have to be honest, my first preference would have been a 6-string in like a really nice flame top tobacco burst or something like that. That's particularly the American ones. That's the image I fell in love with as a teenager growing up, learning the basics of guitar, I guess. And yeah, what can I say? It's I would prefer that, but needs must. And this actually sounds really good. I bought this last year. And it's, yeah, sounds great. I bought this for purpose. So recording the new record, I wanted to experiment with the 7-string. Go somewhere where I personally hadn't gone before. I actually like that middle pickup sound, but I don't really use that sort of thing in my music. But it's a bit Dire Straits, but anyway, the point is that you know, it's another Indonesian-made one, and it looks and feels and plays great. It's got some really cool tones in it. I like the neck pickup especially. It's really good. Just really round and kind of sweet sounding. So I like that sort of thing. In terms of the crunch sound, yeah, I mean, well, you get what you pay for, I guess. It's what you come for the low end. But yeah, it sounds good. It's got it where it counts. I do have some gripes with it. It's not perfect. So maybe one day, if I ever become super famous, maybe Jackson will let me build one, tweak it. Right, I'll tell you what the problem is. So the first thing is that the pickups are mounted direct to body, so you can't actually adjust the height. What you can do is tighten them into the body, and then they're stuffed. What you can do is adjust the pole positions for each pickup. You can adjust the individual setup for each string to some degree, so you can balance it, but it can be a little difficult to achieve the ideal balance just because you don't have that initial room to adjust. So that's one side. The other thing is the fret markings. So they've gone for like these really teeny tiny shark fins, right? Rather than the big ones like you saw on the V. And they really mess with my eyes, as it turns out. So when I'm doing lead work on this one, it can be a little bit confusing. And it's probably just a case that I'll get used to it, but I'd prefer more of an obvious large shark fin, something that's just a little easier and more obvious for me personally. But I can't really complain that much. It's still a really kick-ass guitar. It's a bit more brittle sounding on the top end. You know, it's actually very Strat-like in a sense. think they've done that because the 7-string kind of requires that bit more brightness, you know, like extra brightness for the lower chords. Yeah, just to get the kind of clarity across. Yeah, but immediately you can hear that the bridge pickup isn't actually quite as hot as the neck pickup, and that's because I can't quite get it balanced. This is usually the channel I use for soloing. You know what I mean? So once you kind of set it up, run it, you know, with your settings and the amp and stuff like that, it's not really that big a deal. So anyway, that's the SL7. It's a kick-ass piece of a guitar, but like if I had my ideal way, I would have it a little bit different to this. But I needed to pick up something real quick that I could just plug in and get going with to get this record started and get it on its way. At some point I'll have to buy a spare 7-string because I always have a duplicate of everything, and at that point I'll probably try to address some of the imperfections in this particular guitar. But overall I'm really happy with it, and it's, you know, the guy who sold it to me, he sold it to me because he wasn't playing it. Basically he needed to pay his student loan, and it wasn't getting loved at home, and it is getting loved. It's getting played all the time here. So if you're out there watching, your guitar's in good hands. Right, let's move on to the next one. Right, so here's the next one. This is a Ibanez, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Apparently the original pronunciation is Ibanez. Anyway, Ibanez, as we mostly like to call them. This is an RG770. This was a limited run that they did for a while. They did them in quite a cool, I guess you would describe it as laser blue, I guess. I think it was called laser blue. And then this was the sort of cherry red one. And I was quite hard torn between the two, actually. But I thought the red was just a bit more metal, a little less, you know, it's pretty 80s. It's, you know, it's kind of bright. But I had to pick one, and they play so great. It's really strange because with every other guitar manufacturer, I prefer rosewood necks or ebony, or, you know, rosewood fingerboard or an ebony fingerboard. With Ibanez, that's not the case. I really like their maple boards, and I find their rosewood boards a little bit on the brittle side on the top end for whatever reason. I don't know why that is, and the maple is just warmer. So it's just, yeah, it's just a little bit too brittle with my bone tone, I guess. But yeah, this guitar is, in terms of like outright technical, in terms of like, you know, which is the probably the best produced guitar I've got in my collection, I think this is up there. There's another one that I'll show you a bit later that's also up there, but this is pretty hard to beat. Like, so it's got the Edge tremolo, which I have not actually put in. Yeah, so it's got this, you know, the Edge Pro trems, and they're super, super, super reliable. They return to pitch so well, and whatever they use in terms of the metallics, you know, the actual substance for the locks and things like that, it's really robust. They're not prone to stripping and rusting like the Floyd Rose can be at times. Original Floyds, like I say, tend to perform a little bit better, but yeah, in any case. It's cool, yeah. It's got sweet neck tone. It's not as hot as the others. So you can hear that there's not as much grunt coming from the amp. So it's quiet at pickup, but they sound really awesome. Yeah, it's a nice sweet sounding tone. The necks are just, they're insanely rapid, but they're not for everyone. So the neck on the Randy Rhoads V it's a C shape, but it's not kind of as flat and wide. So the neck on this is kind of like that. Like that, yeah. Whereas the Jackson is sort of like a little bit more like that. So if you don't like a really wide feeling neck right at the fret edges, then you probably won't be so comfortable with one of these. But it's thinner overall, and that's probably got to do with the fact that they are able to reinforce them with these multiple pieces. Yeah, these two skunk stripes down the back, that's what they are. And the Jacksons don't really do that. They kind of do the one solid piece, which I think is good for resonation. But yeah, it just depends. It's whatever floats your boat, and I'm comfortable on both, to be quite honest. There are times where this feels a little bit more strenuous, just doing kind of work right down the lower end. But once I go up to the top end, this is probably the faster neck of the two. But in terms of the dirty sound, this is a little less, like I said, a little less gainy, and it's a little warmer on the bottom end. And that means I kind of actually have to play this a little bit more accurately when I'm riffing. I have to get it right on this guitar. The other ones, when I'm riffing in the low end, they're probably a bit more forgiving, I would say. Just because there's just that little bit of like extra top end, a little bit of extra gain to kind of help you along. Whereas this one, you kind of have to work it a bit more. But when you go up to the top end and you kind of go for, lead playing and stuff like that, takes a bit of getting used to going from one guitar to the other. Yeah, you can really run around on this neck really easily, but there's a couple of like pitfalls. Like I said, when you switch from one guitar to the other, one of the things that's quite easy to do is kind of like pull the string off the board really on these, because they're so like light. They're really responsive to harmonics. The whammy is just, yeah, super effortless. thing I would say though that kind of bugs me, but this is probably my fault more than anything else, is these bars are just like ultra swingy. When you first buy them, they do have these little guys on them. Yeah, but they very quickly don't grip anymore. So again, yeah, I usually have to, like, if I want this to stay put, I have to gunk it up somewhere. One thing I do find, like, I find that the edge systems like this, tend to do these, that wobble sound. For me, it does it better than the Floyd. The Floyds can be a bit on the stiff side for that, just depending on the setup. But I know guys who use Floyds that do that really well, so there must be a way to just set them up really nicely for that. And I'm just not in the know for it. Maybe it's wrong string gauges, I'm not sure. But anyway. That's the Ibanez RG770. Right, let's move along. Off to the next one. Actually, before I go, quick story of where I got this. So this is actually just, I didn't say, but it's just really simple. This is actually from my time working at Anderson's, working in the guitar department. I bought 2 guitars in my time working for them. I bought a 59 reissue Les Paul, Gibson Les Paul, from, I think it was made back in the early 2000s, or late 90s. Anyway, it was before, like, the dark times at Gibson, and that was really a nice guitar. There was a couple of people in the shop working there who were a little bit jealous of it, because the Gibsons that were coming out a little bit later on weren't their best, let's say. It's nice to see them have a bit of a resurgence lately. Long may that sort of continue to go in the right direction. But yeah, anyway, I bought that, and unfortunately I had to let that go during the kind of credit crisis of 2008. I had to sell that off. But the other guitar that I bought was this, and so there was a choice between which one do I sell. Do I sell the Les Paul? Do I sell this? I also had a RR24, a white RR24 with EMG in the bridge, and yeah, I just made the decision that in terms of the technical stuff about this guitar, that this was more useful. So I was going to keep this. The RR24 decided that had to go, considering. I love that guitar, really did. It was beautiful. Really great ebony neck on it, played like a dream. The EMG sounded good in it, but when I plugged in the EMG around all my other guitars, it was so scooped that it kind of sounded like it was going back in the sound a bit too much. I really had to, like, fiddle and fuff with the amp. I couldn't just plug in from one guitar to another, just because, yeah, it was so different. And in terms of levels, gain, everything, yeah. And it wasn't that it was louder, it actually sounded smaller, you know, when I plugged it in. It was louder, but the frequency range of it sounded smaller. So not only did I have to change the gain on the amp, but I also had to change the EQs and muck about with it. It was just too much work. So I let that go, and I let the Les Paul go because, frankly, it was worth the most. It was going to pay back the debt that I needed to get out of, because the banks were after me at the time. So anyway, that's the story of the Ibanez RG770. Bought that from Anderson's Music during my best days there, and yeah, really happy with it. And thanks to Stuart over at Anderson's for hooking me up with this. Anyway, let's move on to the next guitar. Right, so this is my oldest guitar. I got this, my very first guitar was like a crappy Echo SG, like a, it was weird because it wasn't like quite full size. It wasn't a junior guitar, but it wasn't quite full size. It's really strange. So it had a shorter than normal scale, but only just by a little, and the body wasn't quite as like wide as a regular SG. But anyway, um, that was like my dad got me that as my first guitar to see if I was serious about it, and when I didn't give it up, and I kept ranting and raving about this awesome guitar that I'd seen in the store that I was working for, this shop called Ronnie's All Bang and Strum It in South Africa. If you're ever in Johannesburg, do swing by and pay him a visit. He deals in kind of like vintage and rare collectibles, and just like good, decent second-hand guitars that just, I don't know where he finds them, but he does. There's loads of that stuff knocking about in that country, or there was anyway when I was back there. And yeah, this was one of those kind of guitars. It was a bit quirky. So I used to take a lot of flack for this guitar actually when I worked in that store. The jazz players thought it looked really horrible, but they had like a guilty pleasure for this guitar because it sounded really good. And but they didn't want to be seen, with a metal style kind of weird shaped guitar. But it's an interesting shape. It's sort of like, I guess the closest thing to relate it to is probably, sorry, this guitar, I haven't played it in a while. It's got a bit of a dicky jack. It's really old. This guitar is like, it's sort of like an Iceman in a way. So that's the shape. Yeah. It's a little bit like an Iceman, but it's also a little like halfway between an Iceman and an Explorer, something like that. And it was Explorer-like and Kelly-like in a sense. And I guess that was the idea. This is kind of Washburn's take on an Explorer-style guitar. It's a solid tail, and you'll notice really interestingly it has brass saddles and a brass nut. It also has a V-shaped neck profile. Don't know if you can kind of see that. Yeah, there's real sort of thick V-shape to it. And it's really bizarre guitar. But anyway, as far as I can gather, this is like a mid-70s guitar. I think Washburn put this together in 74, as far as I can tell from the serial number. Oh, I should mention I have a Duncan Jazz and a JB in it. When I bought it, it had DiMarzio's in it, Super Distortion, and can't remember what was in the neck. It was another DiMarzio though. And they were great. I loved them, but they weren't reliable for gigging. They would feed back like crazy. Just through, I guess, wear and tear, really. The guitar had been around a long time. Maybe it had been left too close to an amp. I don't know. But the pickups had got a bit microphonic. So I changed them out. And I really like my Duncans, so. Now, originally, this was built with a coil tap. Here it is. So coil tap in this position and coil tap in this position. So that would control the bridge, that would control the neck, and I'm trying to remember if it had phase. No, I think it was just the tone. But you could really mess with the phase and stuff like that by switching to the coil tap, playing in the middle position. You get some really unique tones. And I rewired this obviously when I got the Duncans, and if you look really closely at my the bezels for the pickups, you can see I've got like holes drilled in there, and that's because I'm using the same pickup mounts as I was when I was using the DiMarzios. They had a different screw layout, so this guitar is kind of quirky. But when I rewired it, decided to get rid of the coil tap because I needed it to just be reliable for the shows I was doing. The band I was in at the time, the Construct, was pretty busy. It was getting busy. And I just needed it to work. This guitar used to piss everybody off because the wiring was just, it was really on the brink because it's just really old. Even now, like I said, the input jack is still a bit dicky. I have to go in there every now and then and kind of fix it up. But when you go to clean chorus sounds, this guitar just shimmers. It's lovely, it's bright, and just a super, super, super clear. Yeah, it's really, really pretty sounding. But when you go to the dirty side, that's where the magic happens. This thing is a riff machine. It just sounds really monstrous. Yeah, it's the hottest guitar in my rig in terms of the pickups. I have them set super close to the strings, and I can run a very, very low action on this. It doesn't have giant frets on it. It's actually got a very flat kind of fret profile on it, and it's strangely comfortable even with the V, the V neck. So yeah, really awesome. Now, it's not my favorite for leads, but it's okay. It's pretty good for leads, as long as I don't need the whammy bar because it's a solid tail. And yeah, I have a lot of emotional attachment, I suppose you could say, for this guitar because it's been with me for such a long time. And this was, like I said, my dad bought this for me as my first proper serious guitar. My very first guitar, that crappy SG, we smashed that up when I left the country. It was surprisingly difficult. Usually SGs break really easily, but because it was a cheap knockoff with a bolt-on neck rather than a set neck, it actually turned out to be really hard to smash it apart. And anyway, the idea was leave it in Ronnie's shop or something like that, so you could use it as a wall decoration. He always wanted to have like a guitar that looked like it had been like smashed through a wall. Obviously, he didn't want to use any of his guitars for that because his were worth a fortune, being vintage and rare and collectible. So I volunteered my old guitar. But anyway, aside from that one, this is my oldest guitar, and I'll never get rid of this because it means so much to me. It's a through neck, by the way. I didn't actually point that out earlier. And because it's a through neck, it's very stable. Has been very stable, and it stays in tune brilliantly. The only gripe I have with this guitar, if there is one, is the tone is kind of magical because, well, A, it resonates really well because it's a through neck, but some through necks can sound really dead. This doesn't. And I think one of the reasons is, A, nice pieces of wood. Guitars don't go far without decent timber. But B, it's these brass saddles and the brass nut. Okay, it's the core of why this guitar sounds the way it does, why it has the cut, the clarity, the kind of glassy top end as well. Particularly for those yeah, the reason why it does that is because of those brass saddles and the brass nut. And it's this guitar's greatest advantage, but also its greatest disadvantage, because these things you have to really like clean them and smooth them down and file them and stuff like that, or they break strings left, right, and center. Any of my old bandmates could tell you, like, many a rehearsal where we had to stop things because this thing just munched strings like you wouldn't believe. But once I got a handle on what it was that was causing that, basically the solution is file a little bit of graphite just from a pencil. Just file a bit of graphite from a pencil, like an HB pencil, into the grooves of this, and then otherwise just generally keep it clean so that there's no like bits of gunk other than the graphite that get into the grooves, and then the graphite just lubricates that. And you do the same down the bottom on the saddles, and every now and again you just need to like maybe take a bit of a file to them and get rid of any sharp edges that develop, and then this thing becomes super reliable after that. And as I say, it's mostly just electronics, but yeah, mid-70s Washburn A20. That's, yeah, my longest serving guitar. Right, I think we'll move on. Okay, so this is the very last guitar on the list, and this is the baby, right? If the house was on fire, this is the first one I would save. And if my gear got stolen, this is the one I would cry over the most. Okay. The story about this one, so I'll tell you the story and then I'll play it a bit. Actually, no, you know what? I'll play it first and I'll tell you why it's so special from a playing perspective, and then I'll tell you the story, because it's got the best story behind it of all the guitars, in my opinion. It might be a little bit of a tearjerker though. Warning you. Okay, so you please forgive me. The strings on this haven't been changed in a while because it's been in storage. So if it sounds a little, it might sound a little on like the dead side. It's not the guitar's fault, it's mine. Right, so let's look at the clean tone. I mean, as you can see, it's a Strat. This is a Blade Levinson Strat. An RH4 Strat from the early 80s, 82. Okay, and it's made with a beautiful ash body. So it's a little on the heavy side, but it's not like excessively heavy. It's pretty comfortable, and look at that beautiful like mirror guard on it. The pick guard is just special. And yeah, I mean the timbre on this is spectacular. The neck is super like awesome, slick, tiny, but just perfectly shaped. It's so comfortable, and it's an ebony fingerboard. So this is like my favorite guitar of all my guitars. Grover locking tuners on it, which actually, sorry, they're Spurzels. Sorry, Spurzel. Yeah. These are pretty good all the way up until the 6th string, where there's no point. And anyone who's owned one will know what I mean. They just the grippers go on them, like, but it doesn't matter if you know how to string a guitar. Like, actually, that doesn't matter. And it uses like a Graphtec style nut on it, so the tuning stability on these, even if you're using trem, is spectacular. I don't have a trem in mind because I actually snapped the trem arm during a gig when I still lived in South Africa, and the old bit is still in there, and I just never replaced it. Something I've been meaning to do, but I use this guitar for context. I use the Flying V for anything that's in drop D, so that's locked with a trem for drop D. I use the Washburn 820, the Explorer style one, for anything that's in drop D, but as a solid tail. This guitar was always meant to be able to do both. I could tune it up to standard or use it in drop D at a moment's notice. Just depending on how the gig was going, whether I was having problems with the Washburn. Traditionally it used to snap strings a lot, so if that guitar gave me problems, I could always whip this out. And I didn't have the V back then. Yeah, so that was the whole point. So I didn't really miss the trem when it broke, but I do miss the trem now, so I will end up getting it sorted. But it's just a traditional Strat style trem. It's not floating or anything like that. I mean, you can set it to kind of float a little, but it's never going to be like a full-on whammy bar. It's just a tremolo arm. Anyway, the special thing about this guitar is Mr. Levinson, when he left, apparently, this is the story I've heard, and I have seen this reflected in these guitars, in the later models, he took his pickup patents with him. So these are the original pickups, his kind of patented pickups. And they're quite cool in the way it works. So this guitar can be run in passive, semi-active, or fully active. And there's, 9-volt battery in here. And get this, there's an EQ in the back of the guitar, which is super cool. And then once you set that EQ, you can access it with a screwdriver if you need to change it. But once you set that EQ, just leave it. And so this guitar's got some interesting tricks up its sleeve in terms of tones. So that is the active neck tone. That is semi-active, and that's passive. Passive, semi-active, active. It's quite a big difference. Right. As it turns out, I can't demonstrate the middle pickup because there's a problem with it. I'll find out what that is. Like I said, this guitar's been in storage for a long time, so things happen. Well. Good thing I'm not gigging with it right now. I think it's this blade switch, to be quite honest. This blade switch has kind of had it, so it was due to be replaced anyway. But it does do that kind of signature kind of Mark Knopfler jangly Strat tone in the middle positions. Does that really great. That would explain why this active-passive switch isn't quite gelling in all the positions. Anyway, the thing about it is, in the bridge position, on the fully active mode, it's super gainy. It's really meaty, really gainy, but it's not as compressed and squeezed and scooped as your typical EMG is. And that's the thing that made me fall in love with this guitar. When I first got it, so here's the story about how I got it. My dad was, as I said, I come from South Africa. My dad left South Africa because basically a group of guys broke into his house and they tortured him, played Russian roulette with him. He had 300 odd cigarette burns all up his back. Like I said, they smeared their crap all over the walls. I'm literally talking about feces. And like I said, played Russian roulette with him, all kinds of stuff. And he just had it of, you know, in terms of like the violent crime and all that. And so he left to go back. He was an Englishman, so he left to go back to England for work purposes, just reliable work. He was a musician who never got to do what he wanted to do, and had to be a builder as you know, a means of making a living. And he always hated it because it completely destroyed his fingers, and you know, he just got sucked into it and couldn't get out of that industry, which is kind of like me and retail. I fucking hate retail, but I'm kind of stuck in it because my CV's full of it. Anyway, so fast forward a few years, and all the good building work was kind of happening in Europe. And Germany, he was getting paid a fair wage. In England, you know, they just weren't really paying good rates for, you know, experienced builders. And so he'd lived in Germany before. My sister was actually born in Germany, and you know, so he knew the language and could get on there and all that sort of thing. So he was used to kind of moving around to follow the work. And anyway, went there, and he found this beautiful guitar, but set in pieces. He was doing a few gigs random, you know, like in pubs and stuff like that, just like acoustic sets and chilled electric sets and stuff like that, just as like duo work and stuff like that on the side, just for enjoyment. And so he had a few connections and people he knew who were musicians and stuff like that. And anyway, somebody he'd met in his travels, I guess you could say, had this thing sitting in a heap in the corner of the house, but it was in bits, so the neck wasn't attached, the pick guard was off, the pickups weren't in it, but all the bits were there. And he had just a really good careful look at it and realized that, you know, everything was original, did some checking, made sure everything was 100%, and bought it off the guy for €200, €250, which is nothing. Okay, so this guitar it's worth a lot more than that. I need to check the evaluation. As it is now, like, mine's a bit busted up because it's gigged, but in its original condition, we're talking thousands. They're sought after by people who know what they are. And in any case, he took it to a luthier at a guitar shop, and the guy checked it over, put it back together, did a basic kind of classic Strat setup on it. And I went to Germany for a holiday when I was 16, and this thing was there waiting for me. And it was strange because I remember when I got it, I wasn't that blown away because it wasn't like into like Strats, not old school ones. I didn't realize what a blade Levinson Strat was. I didn't know it was like a super Strat. All I saw was like the classic Strat shape, and it was purple. I was a bit like, you know, back then I was just like, guitars should be black and they should be pointy, and this one wasn't. So, but I ended up falling in love with it because the more I played it, the more I realized, like, hey, this thing actually really sounds cool. If I can learn to set it up right, it will probably play better. And at first, it took a bit of like Strats. You really have to like push yourself to get the most out of them, because tend to run better with higher actions and stuff like that. This one I've got set up like a dream. It just plays beautiful. It's so fast. And it's, yeah, everything sounds just right on it, you know. And it you know, it sustains really well. Everything, like I said, just kind of feels like this guitar. I can pick it up any day of the week and it feels like home. Anyway, the reason why it's a bit of a tearjerker of a story is because, as I said, I was given this by my father as like a real kind of special. He was really kind of proud of me at the time, and you know, how I was going with my study of the instrument. Because he'd left South Africa and it had been some years since I'd last seen him. and a lot had happened. I'd, unbeknownst to him, ended up in a children's home, like an institute, because my mum had lost her work and couldn't get back into it because of the political trouble that was going on in the country. It's basically she worked at the peak of her industry and then became instantly unemployable for that type of work because of racial issues, because of affirmative action in South Africa, and she ran out of money and was really unlucky. She got mugged in a just like a toilet stall in a mall one day, and we ran out of money. And the school I wasn't behaving myself at school, and the school heard about it and involved the courts, and the courts took her kids off her. My brother had already moved out of the house long before this, so he was unaffected. But my sister went to live with the foster family. They didn't think much of me because I was causing trouble at school, and I ended up in a state-run or Salvation Army-run home, I should say, which is another story in itself. But basically, if you look at the first two records, the reason why I so detest religion and I write about it a lot is because I was forced into a position where Christianity was kind of forced down my throat, whether I wanted it or not, because I lived in a Salvation Army home. And because so many bad things had happened to me, from my perspective at the time, I felt like there's definitely can't be a God because he wouldn't be such a twat. And I still agree with that. I still don't. I believe in people, and they can be really great. They can be okay and doing the best to get better. Or they can, sometimes they're amazing, like, I don't know, like Elon Musk or something like that. But he's not perfect, though. He has indiscretions. He's trying harder than most. But anyway, the point is that I believe in people and what people can do when they reach their full potential. Not in some deity. Anyway, point is, I ended up in this home. My father didn't know it was there. And so when I eventually went over to get this, by that point he knew, but there was nothing that we could do about it because the courts had made their rulings. And he had no idea that my playing had kind of moved on and progressed as much as it had. And to be honest, I wasn't that much better, but from his perspective, he was like, oh, I think it just really moved him that I'd stuck with it. And so this was my gift. As a kind of, I guess, a reward for having stuck with it and listened to all the cassettes he used to send me. He used to send me cassettes with like prog and all kinds of interesting and diverse music, and I would listen to them and try to learn the most I could, rather than just kind of staying focused and just stuck on metal and that's the only thing I listened to. He encouraged me to broaden my perspective with at least the purpose of being a better player, if nothing else. And I did that. Did my homework, and I guess he could hear that, and so that's why I got this. And I brought it back, and it was really interesting because at Ronnie's, sometimes I bring it in and do setup work on it and stuff like that, because I used to do setups for people's guitars and stuff like that. So now and again I'd pop this on the bench and set it up and just tidy it up, and I used to keep this really well maintained. And as a joke, we'd put it on the guitar stands and pretend like it was on sale. And the amount of 80s middle-aged guitar guys, working, gigging guitar guys who used to walk in one after another going, oh, is the Levinson for sale? Is the Levinson for sale? And we used to just make up prices and toy with them because, of course, it wasn't for sale. But they didn't imagine that it was mine because I was still quite young at the time. I was only 16, 17 at the time. So that's the basic story of it. I didn't realize how awesome it was until people really started like hitting me up for serious sales offers. Anyway, the reason why it's a sad story is because when I first came over to the UK, eventually in 2005, in my mid-20s, not long after my dad decided to take his own life, he hung himself. I found him hanging in his bedroom one morning. He'd always kind of told us he was going to cash out. you know, he didn't want to die from like his lungs failing. He used to smoke these like cigarillos, and you know, his chest sounded like a washing machine with like washers bouncing around in it sometimes, you know, some mornings. And he'd always struggled a bit with alcoholism, and yeah, he just reached a point, I think, where he became really like uh, detached from the modern world and the kind of fickle nature of it, and the kind of, you know, like Heat magazine and the paparazzi, and just like Big Brother and all that kind of crap. Just, you know, fucking um, stupid talent shows like Britain's Got Talent and crap like that. Just fucking industry driven dribble. I think a lot of that just kind of pushed him further and further to it. You know, like my dad would have been happy living in a log cabin, you know, and like having to fish for his food. You know, that's what he was like. And then obviously he loved his music, and you know, his sort of, I guess he felt like his life passed him by a little. He talked to me more about it than most people, and that's why I know. That's why I can say that confidently. And he warned us. That's why I'm not angry at him, because, well, I get angry sometimes, but it's me being probably selfish. I knew he was going to do it. He always said he was going to do it, but you know, you kind of, people say that and you're like, that's awkward. You're being a bit dramatic. Sometimes they're being very serious. I think it takes more guts than most people realize. Anyway, that's not me encouraging it. I'm just saying sometimes people call people who take their own lives, as they call them, cowards. I don't think that's right. I think it takes more guts than most people realize, and they should take the warnings more seriously. Anyway, that's kind of how I feel about that. Anyway, that, like I said, sad end to the story, but yeah, I love my dad and everything he did for me, and this thing stays with me to the grave, and then goes to my son. Unless circumstances change, it goes to my son without a question of a doubt, because of all my possessions, this probably means the most to me in the world. Anyway, that's the story of all my guitars. I'm really sorry to have finished on a bit of like a low note. So let's brighten things up a little bit with like a closing riff, I guess. What should I play? These next few riffs here are, you know, it was actually written on this guitar, so it's kind of fitting that I finish on this guitar.